All right. Shall we dig into Epstein a little bit here? Because there was a flurry of activity about this right after the shutdown. And I did a short video. You can see this on social media. I actually had just done it on Instagram stories, and I had such a reaction that people asked that we put it on the feed, which we did, which was sort of interesting timing because of what happened afterwards. And so let me just back up a little bit. There's like the far history of Epstein, and then there's the recent history. I feel like the recent history just over the last several days is a little hard to follow the balancing ball on. So let's just start there for a moment. So we had this government shutdown. During the government shutdown, the House of Representatives is not in session. Speaker Johnson did not have any business that he was doing during that time. And there's could be an argument for why. I mean, the lawmakers, like the government, the federal government is supposed to be shut down. Lawmakers do get paid because they're paid through the US Constitution. But he made the decision that they're not going to be actively in session, voting on bills or doing hearings or anything like that. So there's an argument for why to not do that, because otherwise you're stressing a system, right? That is already being stressed. There's a lack of funding. But there were those that were accusing him of playing politics with that, because there was a new lawmaker that needed to be sworn in that would be a deciding vote on behalf of those in the House of Representatives to vote on a very unique petition to force the House to vote on an issue. So really, when you're the House of Representatives, the Speaker gets. This is why the majority party matters. They get to decide, like, what is going to be the agenda, what's going to be the business, and if there's enough lawmakers that want to break with the majority, they have to do something called a discharge petition that basically gets enough votes to force a vote, sort of generally speaking. So this lawmaker is waiting to get sworn in. And there were those critics of Speaker Johnson saying, well, the House isn't in session just to keep her from being sworn in to stop an additional vote on Jeffrey Epstein. Why is this? Because there's a bipartisan effort in the House. Thomas Massey, a Republican, Ro Khanna, a Democrat, have gotten together with others supporting them, saying they want to pass legislation that would force the Justice Department to release more information about the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. This law would require the Justice Department to do so. This came after the Justice Department essentially said, there's not much to see here, folks. Yes, the administration had promised coming in, we're going to have all this daylight on this Jeffrey Epstein mysterious investigation. And then there was a reversal. The Justice Department essentially said, we've looked through this. We don't think there's a there. So we're not going to release more information. So this catalyzed a group that's bipartisan to say, yeah, that's not good enough for us. We actually want to see. We want to see for ourselves why there's not more information coming out about this particular topic. Okay, so that's a little background into just what's happening in the shutdown. But as the government reopens last week, Democrats release a tranche of information related to emails, the Jeffrey Epstein investigation that some members of Congress had access to. Then the House Oversight Committee, with the majority led by Republicans, also released 20,000 emails that were part of their investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. So you're getting like a flood of information regarding Jeffrey Epstein just as the government is reopening. And so this is suddenly something that the White House has to respond to and that the press jumps on immediately. So my critique on this, just to kind of give you my perspective on the way that politics and the press can have an unhealthy relationship. This was definitely a strategic choice by both of these groups to try to get out in front of this Jeffrey Epstein issue. Okay, we're going to be back in session. Let's force this vote. We see Republicans breaking with the White House. You have certain lawmakers that have a political agenda, or they really want more on this particular issue. They're going to move forward before the midterm elections. You see all these sort of different political dynamics at play. And yes, there are a huge group of victims at the center of this story, more than 1,000, according to the Justice Department, that are being mentioned in this conversation too. But there's a lot of politics underfoot. And so as a member of the press, I've seen this play out over and over again, where you have politicians put forward a story, and the press chases it immediately without asking the question, is this what my audience really would like to hear about at this very moment? And that's the question I actually asked on social media, which is, Is this what the American people wanted prioritized? During the shutdown, we talked about really big issues, affordability of what's going on with housing prices, prices, and healthcare. These are issues that affect the American people every single day. These are very difficult issues. And because of that, they can be less salacious or interesting than headlines that are related to a more salacious case like the Jeffrey Epstein case. Now, I believe the Jeffrey Epstein case has a lot of questions. There are more than 1,000 victims. There are all sorts of questions about how this man had so much access to so many powerful people and what's really going on with this investigation. I mean, this is a big story. Don't get me wrong. My question was, should it be prioritized in the way it was prioritized just hours after the government reopened? With the government reopening, is that exactly what the American people wanted to focus on? And that was a question that I posed. So some say yes, others said no, that they hadn't thought about it. And that's what I was reflecting through some of my conversations with all of you on Smarter News, which is I hadn't gotten a lot, had some questions about the Epstein files, always do. But as far as like the matter of priority for you and your family, that hadn't been at the top of the list over the last several weeks. So I was sort of shocked about how easily the politicians just put this out there. The entire press corps just goes and follows it. And we're not saying, okay, well, let's talk a little bit about this, because there are some things to remind ourselves as we're looking for more information about this investigation. And again, there's many people that are looking for this. And I just want to mention this before I play a little sound from some of the people involved and pull some sound from Republicans so you can see how different they are on this particular issue. So one thing I just want to remind you is that in an investigation, an active investigation that's ongoing, even if Congress passes a law that requires the Justice Department to release information, if there's an active investigation, the likelihood is the Justice Department does not have to release information on an active investigation. This is going to become important in just a moment. I'll explain more on this. So, yes, Congress can vote on this, which we expect them to do on Tuesday. And we expect right now, although this could change, that there will be enough votes in the House that this legislation to compel the Justice Department to release more information will pass. But then there's a huge question about whether or not it will actually ever see the light of day in the Senate. If there's enough political pressure, the Senate could potentially vote on this. If there's not, the Senate may not vote on it because Republicans have the majority. Even if the Senate votes on it and it becomes law passed by the House and the Senate, the president would still have to sign it. He still would have veto power. Even if this becomes the law of the land, the Justice Department has an argument to say if there's an investigation ongoing, we don't have to release ongoing investigatory, if that's the correct word, material, because this is an investigation that's taking place. So then there's a question about the quality of material that's actually released. The other thing that's really important in the American justice system, as you know, any number of us could be under investigation and not know it, or we could be named in an investigation. Have you ever been, part of an office that there was some sort of criminal investigation or civil lawsuit, or in a neighborhood where something like that happened? I mean, maybe there was a party that you once were at one time, and there was a fight that happened later on. Your name could come up in an investigation just because your name is part of an investigation, or even if someone alleges criminal activity in an investigation, that doesn't mean that you're guilty. Obviously, there's certain cases where you read something as part of an investigation, it's hard not to deduce that someone's guilty. But it is a reminder in the American justice system that people are innocent until proven guilty. And that's why investigations matter before getting to a court of law. So there's a lot of focus on names related to the Jeffrey Epstein investigations. What we've seen over the last several days is that Jeffrey Epstein had correspondence with a lot of people, Democrats, Republicans, high profile politicians, writers, leaders, businessmen, all sorts of people. Just because they had a correspondence with him, we don't really know the nature of their relationship or how much that matters. Right now, it's much easier to run with the story and say, look at all these names of these individuals. Quite frankly, the names are shocking. But we have to also show discipline that just because you're named in an investigation doesn't mean you're guilty of something and doesn't necessarily mean you're relevant. So that's something that with all of these emails, I feel like that's also really getting lost. And then let's just talk about the victims for a moment, because in all of this, there are clearly people that were absolutely hurt, lives changed forever because of the actions of Jeffrey Epstein. He faced charges because of that. But he got this, just to remind you, sort of I don't want to say sort of, it was a very odd, unusual deal that he was able to finagle in Florida back in 2007, 2008. So the case was between 2005 and 2008. As part of this agreement, we've been over this, but just a reminder, he basically gets what he argues is immunity from any further federal prosecution, which then for many years, that's almost the end of anything we hear about Jeffrey Epstein. It wasn't until 2019, and it was a new media investigation by a Miami-based journalist that started looking at this and being like, what the heck happened here? Which then gave permission, essentially gave permission for the federal government, federal prosecutors to say, we're going to challenge that plea deal. And there's enough information here to go after this guy, which is what they were doing when Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide in prison, according to the government. I know there are those that have questions about whether or not he did. Either way, he was found dead in his jail cell in 2019. A lot of the victims that we have heard from or have been listed in connection to these cases, just according to media reports, I'm not saying that these are all of them, but just so you have some clarity, go back to 1994 to 2004. And because of that, we haven't seen a ton of more additional cases. There have been some that have tried to bring their cases to a court of law, depending on where they live, their age at the time, when these crimes happened or alleged crimes happened. They could run up against the statute of limitations. Also, there's a question of just time and resources, money that allow someone to pursue a case against someone's estate or against an individual. But we didn't see, from that time period of 2008 on, he was released from jail in 2009. We didn't see a huge flood of cases against him. And Jeffrey Epstein, I'm talking about. So there's time lost in this for these victims too. And what the question is for right now, and I'm trying to say this with a degree of sensitivity, which is sometimes what's right and what feels like justice runs up against a timeline in the American judicial system. And we're sort of in that time period. So Congress is working on this to get more information, some of Congress, but whether or not that information could lead to more cases is a complete unknown. There seems to be this run to, if we get this information by those that want it, then all of these people are going to be exposed and these, criminal cases could happen against them, or they'll feel the retribution of their actions, which seems to be more like the court of public opinion versus a court of law. And as long as you're aware of that, that's what's most important to me. It's not whether or not what's right or wrong. It's just a question of what does winning look like here for the victims at this time? What does that look like for them? And then we have to ask a more skeptical question, which is, what does winning look like for the different politicians, many of whom have been in office over a great deal of time period, not all of them, but a great deal of time period, where at any other moment, they could have brought up the Jeffrey Epstein case and advocated too, but they're choosing this particular political moment to do it. Now, Thomas Massey, who's been on the forefront of this, says this is about the victims for him and about exposing what actually happened here. Although he's very, you're going to hear from him. He says he doesn't know if the president's implicated at all. He just feels like that they're getting the runaround and he doesn't like it. So here's what Thomas Massey, who's the leader of this group in the House that's moving this legislation forward, here's what he's saying about this issue.
I think we could have a deluge of Republicans. There could be 100 or more. I'm hoping to get a veto-proof majority on this legislation when it comes up for a vote. And, the president's been saying this is a hoax. He's been saying that for months. Well, he's just now decided to investigate a hoax, if it's a hoax. And I have another concern about these investigations that he's announced. If they have ongoing investigations in certain areas, those documents can't be released. So this might be a big smokescreen, these investigations, to open a bunch of them as a last-ditch effort to prevent the release of the Epstein files. it's a small world. Dogs don't bark at parked cars, and we are winning. I'm not tired of winning yet, but we are winning. And not only the speaker, but the attorney general, the FBI director, and the president himself and the vice president, they're taking a big loss this week because after months of fighting, I am winning this week with Ro Khanna. We're forcing this vote, and it's going to happen. I would remind my Republican colleagues who are deciding how to vote, Donald Trump can protect you in red districts right now by giving you an endorsement. But in 2030, he's not going to be the president, and you will have voted to protect pedophiles if you don't vote to release these files, and the president can't protect you then. This vote, the record of this vote, will last longer than Donald Trump's presidency.
Okay. So you hear it. That's Thomas Massey, you mapping out his argument. What do you think the president had to say about that? Let's take a listen to President Trump.
Team Grove, you are calling for could be a smoke screen to block the release of more files. Is that the case?
Well, I don't want to talk about it because fake news like you're a terrible reporter, and fake news like you, they just keep bringing that up to deflect from the tremendous success of the Trump administration. So a guy like Massey, his poll numbers are showing he's at 6% approval rating right now. And we call him Rand Paul Jr. because he never votes for the Republican Party. So they're using Jeffrey Epstein as a deflection from the tremendous success that we're having as a party.
They want to talk.
Okay, so that's what President Trump has to say. Let me just play for you one more piece of sound. This is from Senator Barrasso. He's a Republican in the Senate. So remember, right now, you're going to have a lot of conversation between the people in the House and the White House. And there's going to be this flurry of activity because we expect this vote on Tuesday, tomorrow. But then there's a question about the Senate. So what are Republican senators saying about this? Here's Senator John Barrasso.
Look at that. But we want transparency and accountability. What I also know is that Jeffrey Epstein is a convicted sex offender and he is dead. And President Trump threw him out of Mar-a-Lago 21 years ago. To me, what's going on with the Epstein, what's going on also with the shutdown is this is the Democrats trying to appeal to their far left base and trying to change the topic from a failed shutdown, which hurt many, many Americans, like a lot of people I was with last night at a veterans event in Wyoming where they wanted to talk about the pain each one of them experiences in the shutdown, and Epstein never came up for discussion.
But So one of the things that Senator Barrasso said is that he believes this is very politically motivated by Democrats to this term of turning President Trump into a lame duck president. Early in his term, essentially strip some power away from him and make it less about the White House, quite frankly, and more about what's happening in Congress. That's almost a political debate that just is sort of happening. But I want you to hear different voices because there's a lot of different voices on the Hill about what direction this needs to go. And then a question that needs to naturally be asked, which is, this is your time and money. So is this being spent in the right way for the American people, with all due respect to the victims? Kathy had this question, which I think is important. Couldn't the defense lawyers compel the information as part of their lawsuit? Kathy, I think you're talking about what's going on with the potential ongoing litigation related to Jeffrey Epstein. That's the point that I was trying to make, which is that ongoing litigation right now, we're not seeing these new cases coming forward. And we don't know the reason why for that. If there's more than 1,000 victims, we have to ask that question. Is it because some of these crimes were committed in some cases more than 20 years ago? Allegedly. They always say allegedly, correct? Right? All the allegations, they're spanning several decades. Are they up against a statute of limitation? Is there a limit of evidence that would allow someone to actually try to seek prosecution? Is that part of the problem? And is that evidence potentially in these documents held by the Justice Department that politically may not find it expedient? Yes, the Justice Department is supposed to follow the law of the land and have no politics involved. But we know politics and the Justice Department being intertwined has been a huge conversation topic over the last several years. And so that's one of the questions. Is there is there data? Is there evidence? Is there something in here that would empower these victims to come forward and have more litigation, have their day in court? And is that being suppressed by those in power trying to serve others that are in powerful positions? That's really at the heart of all of this. But we don't see that litigation. I don't have a bunch of cases that I'm like, okay, here's the 75 cases that victims now that are in different stages of challenge right now. And they're trying to get to the Justice Department to get this or that or the other thing. That sort of active litigation we're not seeing. And we just have to ask the question as to why. It doesn't seem like there's any sort of a doubt. I like to keep everything like, here's one side, here's another side, here's something to think about. With Jeffrey Epstein, it doesn't seem like there's any doubt at all that not only was he a convicted criminal, which is a fact, a convicted sex offender, but that he was involved in nefarious activities of all sorts. And the stories that you hear from those that were around him are horrific. And this is where we have to, as journalists, have an honest conversation with our audience about what does justice look like in the American justice system? Can it be found in court, or is it going to be pursued in a different way? Whether it's public opinion, and that has a negative connotation, but whether or not that your story can come out, and that you have a right to your story, and that you're able to tell it. And so these are the uncomfortable parts of the Jeffrey Epstein story that sits in front of us right now, that I even see in the media is just being used. It's just being used for clickbait, and the Democrat leaning, left leaning media is using it one way. The conservative media is using it another way. There's witch hunts, there's hoaxes, there's this, there's that, the other thing. I just wonder if the American public is being heard through all of this. And if you believe this topic has to be tackled and moved out of the way so that we can move on to the next thing, totally your prerogative. But I just want to make sure that we're thinking about this critically, and we're covering the multiple facts of this very, very difficult, very, very tough topic. So the things to watch for: what are we going to see on Tuesday? Thomas Massie and others, Congressman Massie says he definitely has the votes. And here's what's to watch on this. Do Republicans see, now that the president came out, by the way, that's an important news item I failed to mention. President came out on Sunday night, and he said, I think the Justice Department should just release everything. We have nothing to hide, which is a reversal. So who knows? Okay, like who knows what's really going on there? The question here is, what do the votes actually look like? Number one, does it pass? Seems like it will, but let's see. And if it is true, what Thomas Massie says, that 100 Republicans could sign on, then we're in a whole different story, because that shows a rising tide of bipartisan support for more information. I just want to make sure that we're clear that more information doesn't necessarily mean that we have the answers that everybody is looking for or wants. But I'm all for more data. I'm always for more information. So it just seems like there's a lot of politics at play in the middle of this too. I just want to make sure that we're aware of it. And Christina's raising a really interesting point. The Republicans are the ones who ran on this. So that's why it's interesting. You're right, Christina. So, part of the reason why this story even got the attention is because the Trump administration and Republicans said, this has been hidden from us. The Epstein files, what actually happened there, this has been hidden from the American public. It's the elite and those in political power that are hiding it. And we're going to make sure that the American public knows about it. And then when the Justice Department got into office, the leadership said, yeah, we looked through it and we don't think there's anything there. We think everybody that should be prosecuted has been prosecuted, that there was evidence to have cases against them. And the rest, unfortunately, we don't think that there's anything else. It was like a 1.5-page document. We did a podcast at the time that it was released, because it was sort of shocking. You're like, that's all? It was just a reversal. So that was the catalyst that led to some Republicans to say, hey, wait a minute. We're supporting this administration. We're going to need more than that. And this is what really started this. So you do see Democrats and Republicans coming together in a unique way here. And, really sort of this break within the Republican Party ahead of the midterm elections. You have those that are firmly in President Trump's camp and right in step with him and what he wants to talk about. And then you have these others that are saying, yes, but wait a minute, this is what the American people really wanted. This is how we thought this administration would be different. And we believe in, some of these policy priorities of this administration, but on this, we don't agree with it. This is what Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is talking a lot about. One time a fervent Trump supporter who's now saying, listen, I still support President Trump, but I don't support him on this. And she's incurred the wrath of the President Trump because of that. So interesting dynamics, a lot to think about. I want to play you one last soundbite as I leave you. Reince Priebus used to be part of the Trump administration in the past. He's been part of the Republican Party for a long time. And he's, just so you get the setting, this is on ABC, he's on a panel. He says something very interesting. And then he kind of says something that tails off at the end about how there maybe needs to be a different path forward for some of these victims. Just take a listen to this. I thought this was one of those things that could easily pass by, but there might be something here.
Guys, division is profit in America. And if you're dividing and you have money that you make and you get clicks online and you're fundraising, Marjorie Taylor Greene is one of the biggest fundraisers in the Republican Party.
Next to Donald
and she's
Trump.
Actually, yeah, of
All
course,
right.
because he's president of the United States.
I've got
to be clear,
Yeah.
what I think what we should be talking about, as Donna did, is number one, the victims.
Yeah.
I don't think there should be special treatment for the elite, but I think that there should be a process in place for protecting victims as well that don't want
Okay,
to name
so
police.
I
And
want
there should be a panel and a
move
judge
on. I
involved.
want to move on to another
Okay, so we got cut off there. He said there should be a panel and a judge involved, another path forward for victims to talk. That may lead us down in an entirely, I don't even know what that would look like. But Congress has a variety of different ways that they can investigate. So one wonders, just listen to that one more time.
But these guys, division is profit in America.
Division is profit in America. I just want you to think about that as you go into this week. Division is profit, division is profit, division is profit. And think about how that moves people on social media or gets them to click, gets them to watch, gets them activated. And think about the economy that's created around that. Just think about it. It's one of the things that we're trying to work against at Smarter News, and it's a tough current to swim against. Because everybody else can do it and you can do it easily. You can do it really well. At Fox News, I remember in these editorial meetings, there would be these conversations about, well, what is the red meat topic of the day? Just like the viewers are lions and all you need to do is like throw them a piece of red meat for, your panel to tear apart and get people angry about it and then go to commercial. And that's going to be a way to get viewers. I hated that. I thought, well, how is that productive for anybody? Like, what are we actually learning when we're reporting the news if we're doing that? Division is profit. So just keep that in mind. I don't know exactly what it means or how it applies across the board. But to me, when I heard that, I thought, division is profit. Think about the fundraising emails you get. Think about what's being put on social. Always have to follow the money.